Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome back to the Logistics Hub. And today we're going to be moving the topic on to look at what happens when the next crisis hits. We've had attacks on ships in the Red Sea, which is just the latest example of a series of shocks to global trade. And in this conversation, we're going to look at what can be done to improve the resilience of the international fresh produce supply chain in the face of such disruptive events. And joining me to talk through all of that is Steve Alaerts from Foodcareplus in Belgium.
Thanks for having me.
Steve, thanks so much for joining us. Before we dive into the meat of the discussion, please do just tell us a bit about yourself, about Foodcareplus, and the roles that you take in the industry.
Well, Foodcareplus is a logistics service provider operating globally in 6 food segments. Fresh produce, obviously, is one of our most important segments we work in. But we do also actively assist companies with their international markets in meat and poultry, in dairy, bakery, and confectionery. So we cover quite the largest portion of the food chain. We are based with our head office in the port of Antwerp, Bruges. Well, now it's a merged name. It's Antwerp, Bruges. Bruges obviously is very known for other reasons, maybe than the port. And we see ourselves as real transport architects. So what we do is we render services for our food customers that want to reach new international markets. So we help them actually connecting with markets. Yeah.
And I believe your colleague has
exactly.
a couple of short slides.
Yes, I'd like to invite one of our tech partners here of Duckflow. So we use their technology and data that they supply to us in order to make, let's say, decisions forward for our customers to start and set the scene a little bit on the discussion.
Thank you very much for inviting me, Steve. Indeed, I'm Michiel, co-founder at Duckflow. We make software where we track containers, but I will not do my full pitch today. I will actually do that tomorrow on the startup stage. But I did want to highlight one key service that we do for logistics service providers, where we track ETAs of containers that are going over the ocean. And we do that by combining a lot of data from different data sources. For example, from the carrier, which has a certain ETA of a vessel to the port. But we also get the ETA from the terminal, which has a more accurate prediction in the 3 days before the vessel will arrive. And we cross-check that data with AIS data, satellite data from the vessel, to see, is this possible? So we do this for all the shipments of logistics service providers, of shippers. And we saw something that was happening like a few weeks back when the Red Sea crisis really hit. Around Christmas, and I think, Steve, you have a story about that.
Yes. So just about a week before Christmas, I was preparing for my Christmas holiday with my family. A couple of weeks, 2 weeks, Christmas tree, family dinners, very much fun, obviously, and a little calmer period on the work side. But then suddenly in the morning, our dashboard started to send some alerts. And what actually was happening is what Michiel is going to show you. So we filmed it so that you can see what I saw about a week before Christmas.
So indeed, I was also preparing for like a more lazier week, but we got a lot of calls, what's happening? And we plotted out every vessel, every trade flow, or every order that's on the way somewhere, where it's going, and the direction of the ship. And what we saw was that all of these vessels suddenly were going back. For example, they were going Europe to Asia, and suddenly they were turning back, so in the wrong direction. Same was happening westbound, where we saw that vessels suddenly were going south instead of north. So all of these vessels, we highlighted them, and we took some very actually simple rules to see which one are already deviated and which one are not, so that we can inform everybody about the ETA. And we even know this deviation before the carrier knew it. If we ask the agents of the carrier, when will the vessel arrive? They just said, we'll inform you when we know. But we already know what happened. And I think that really sets the stage for the discussion and the crises that we see today, and we will also discuss.
Thanks, Michiel.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. So just a reminder, so tomorrow at Startup, you can have a full presentation of what they do. So can you imagine, Mike, preparing for Christmas, and suddenly we saw vessels that passed the Strait of Gibraltar on their way to the Suez Canal, turning back and going the other way in direction. And we had hundreds of reefer containers on board of these vessels, not only with, as I said, chocolate and other products that have a longer shelf life, but especially a lot of products that have a shorter shelf life.
And how do you react to that? I mean, do you have contingency planning, disaster planning for exactly these sort of scenarios, or are you having to sort of respond on the fly?
Well, unfortunately, we're architects, and we always, work, for our customers, just like you build a house, where we try to, build solutions and make sure that everything is in place. Unfortunately, for the majority of the contracts that we see, people still use a very single mode of operation. Remember, 2 years ago, when we were in the pandemic, there was a lot of discussion about nearshoring, friendshoring, being less dependent on certain infrastructure, on certain customers and supply chains, and we already forgot. 2 years later, we were in exact the same situation. Nobody was prepared. Nobody was prepared what was going on.
I mean, that's a criticism of the industry, isn't it? Have we learned this time? Are we going to be in a better position? Are companies now taking this more on board, do you think?
It's a little bit of criticism, yes. But I think it's difficult to transform from an industry where we're used to look at most economical routing, fastest lead time to market, at a certain price point, where there's a little trade-off, so that you can get, this industry has very thin margins, obviously, so everybody's looking in order to make sure that they can land a product at a certain cost in a market. But then, what happens if you have a strike in a certain port? Or a canal gets blocked. I mean, it was not only Suez, obviously. The Panama Canal at a certain point of time had hundreds of vessels queuing. All that fruit on board of these vessels were losing value day by day. Now, if people would already had situations and solutions A, B, and C that they would have been using before in a more, let's call it, synchromodal way, synchromodal plus way, then they would have already had channels they could start shifting volumes in order to make sure the fruit actually arrives in market. What we've seen now is nobody was prepared. All that value was lost. And obviously, following the pandemic, from the insurance industry out, a lot of the delay clauses were removed from the insurance contract, which literally meant that there was no compensation at all for the incidents in the situation that took place in the Suez Canal.
Referred to synchromodal plus, was it? Tell me a bit more about that. What does that involve?
Well, it's a concept that we actually use because it's not a real world, and it's a little bit of a gimmick because we're Foodcareplus and we use synchromodal plus. People know intermodality. It means you use various modes of transport in order to make sure that you reach a point from A to B. In synchromodal, you're going to have multiple intermodals, where you're going to make sure that you move product, again, in a synchronal way, more based from when you want the product to arrive, rather than from when you are ready to ship it. So, imagine yourself that you are an importer based in Canada, and what you want is that you have a weekly arrival of fruit. Now, you can do one thing. You can work with a carrier or various carriers, you contract with them, and you assume that these vessels will be timely, and that the fruit all arrives at the same time. Now, if we would go in all the data that we have for the last couple of years, you will see it never happens like that. Suddenly you get peaks of products coming in and out. And in many of the markets, there is already so much speculation on price that if you get a moment, and we see it now in China, obviously with, for example, conference pairs being shipped, that suddenly you have no arrivals of fruit for 2 to 3 weeks, and then suddenly you have 3 weeks volume coming into the port. What happens, obviously, is they can't get that product in the market. So what you could also do is say, I am going to deliver fruit to these destinations in a model A, B, and C. And obviously, C and B is going to be most likely more expensive. But if you would add up everything and on average, you would have a much more comfortable situation making sure that product is going. For China, obviously, you could use maybe trains, other routes, a combination of air transport, sea transport, and other combinations. And if you do that, and then I wanted to use it in a respectful way, if it really becomes a problem, you can start shifting volumes from one to another. And we see that, unfortunately, following the pandemic, again, everybody was operating in mono mode, and that is a little bit of a problem. And when we discussed it with customers to start thinking about it, they say, yeah, well, we have to, because our competitors, obviously, they're also shipping fruit, and we need to make sure we can deliver it in a competitive way. But everybody was hit now, right?
Well, indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
And indeed, how would you assess where we are at the moment? You mentioned Panama, you mentioned Suez, the situation in South Africa with the ports. How difficult a moment is this for the fresh produce industry, and how precarious is supply right now, do you think?
I think we really have to start realizing that this is going to be a permanent crisis. We're constantly going to have challenges, especially when it comes to infrastructure. A lot is impacted by climate effects. And as a result of that, not to mention geopolitics and potentially labor issues and strikes and all the other aspects with that, I think we are going to have to go in a future world where we assume that we cannot be too dependent on, infrastructure or supply chains in certain matters, and start building contracts where we, let's say, hire different types of solutions in order to reach certain markets. Yes, it's going to increase the cost in general, but I'm also sure that in time it will flatten out. Let me give you a good example. When in Cape Town, and I hope, I don't know whether we have people from South Africa here in the audience, but it's a very sensitive topic. When in the port of Cape Town there are issues, people start realizing we need to try to use another gateway in order to get the fruit out. So what happened, for example, is people started, looking at solutions, trucking fruit into Namibia, at the land border, and then moving it through a Namibian port in order to ship it out. But in a situation like this, everybody starts doing that. And obviously the resources there are too small. Too small infrastructure. Why? Because the infrastructure was never used in the past for these type of solutions. So imagine a world we are going to constantly, and maybe only 20% of fresh produce is going to use that channel. People are going to invest in infrastructure in Namibia, obviously, and there is, if necessary, a solution, for shipping product out. Because at the end, the worst thing is that the produce is not valorized or is wasted. Huh?
Oh, absolutely, yeah, definitely. I mean, it seems to me you're talking about we need more flexibility within the supply chain. Is that what you're saying? And
yes.
While that sounds lovely in principle, it must be quite hard to, you don't necessarily have availability of other forms of transport at the drop of a hat to call upon, do you?
Well, it's not new. It's maybe new in fresh produce, and actually it's a little bit weird because it's most necessary in fresh produce because of short shelf life. But for example, in the automotive industry, it's very common. You know why? When there are factories somewhere and they need to assemble cars, if you have certain parts that are missing, the factory stops. People can't manufacture cars. So they have these type of contracts and transportation solutions in place in case they kind of anticipate, or when they expect that because of climate, maybe weather, vessels are going to arrive a week later, that they start using other modes of transport. What I really disliked also for the last couple of months, and I understand, Europe has a plan, we want to be the leader when it comes to, going to a greener world. But the retail sector in Europe has been very quickly starting to, de-promote air freight, for example. And I think it was a little bit unjust. Of course, also the air freight industry need to invest in more sustainable aviation fuel or other solutions, but ultimately they'll get there. But now saying that air freight is not the right mode of transport, well, I don't think that for the last couple of weeks that would be the case. Huh? A lot of people are doing that, obviously. Yeah, so.
Yeah, most definitely. And it's interesting hearing your perspective because a lot of, we don't often take a lot of outside learnings from other sectors that could be applied in fresh produce. From all the wide sectors that you cover, what else do you think that the fresh produce industry could pick up or learn or benefit from that we've seen?
What I find compelling, and of course I've been pitching a little bit duck flow here, is that there is still so much volume that is being handled in a way as we handled it 30, 40 years ago. There is so much technology out there to help us with planning. And I know many people here talk about, how can we use AI, generative AI, in order to make solutions, in order to get a better planning, because of course it is a complicated matter. And it will be required, by the way, for the Synchro Modality Plus, because it's very complex. But what I find compelling is that still a lot of the things that are already used in other industries when it comes to better planning software, monitoring of cargo, and these type of solutions, that they're still not used in many of these flows because of the so-called price tag. A good example is a couple of years ago, we discussed with our insurance company that we would like to, sell some kind of a security package, which means that if an insurance company has a feeling that you are, controlling, you're fact-checking, you're controlling your data, the investment that you would do to do this monitoring, so which is literally $50, $60 on a container, you would win that back because the premium that the insurance company, bills, brings the premium down because they have more security. They know that you are really taking care of that. Still, we see very weird situations where maybe there are monitors used, but nothing does anything with the data. They don't make informed decisions with the information that is being collected, and that is really weird. And I think the fresh produce should really start, taking it very seriously and invest more in tools that will help them to get a better market for their products.
It's all very well talking about AI, but as you say, data has to be the starting point of that, because you can't get anything out of AI without having really good quality data to teach the system, can you? What areas of the shipping sector and the logistics sector do we need to be analyzing more closely, do you think?
What I think also today now, again, a reefer container is also that's a product from many decades ago. Of course, they've been working very hard on using, other cooling systems in order to make it more environmental friendly, less energy using, etc., etc. But I think there's still a lot of room to grow here. I really believe in the concept of product containers, which means that these containers, I'm not saying they're hospitals. If you put bad fruit in a container, it will never improve. But I mean, you can actually get premiums of product in your market if you are capable of preparing your product more in that container. I mean, how often already have we seen solutions where people say we can, for example, start ripening bananas, and you can control that actually. I mean, the systems are there. You can control that from the moment that that the product is on the water. Still, we're using very old-fashioned way, in order to get that product ready for the market. I mean, we should do a lot more in that. I also think there is a big future. There's been a huge discussion on it 2 days ago at IFPA's Executive Summit. But packaging is also something that we really need to take, a serious look at. I mean, and not only from the fact that it's a cost and it's a requirement. No, what can the packaging do in combination with a reefer container in order to make sure that, specifically for cases like the incidents that we had and the crisis that we will continue to see, how can it contribute to solving that, making sure that the fresh produce arrives,
And how can it? What sort of examples are you thinking of? Are you talking about smart packaging that communicates, or are you just talking about better shelf life and freshness?
Better shelf life and freshness, yeah. Still a lot there, to do improvements in, absolutely. But of course, there is the discussion on the plastic. I don't have to explain you. Right now there is a huge discussion going on between Europe and Canada, and especially Canada, when it comes to packaging and the ban of plastic, but the immense impact it will have on the quality of the produce, obviously. Yeah.
I want to ask you about something else. You recently took up a new role, I understand, as chair of the IFPA Supply Chain Council. And I've got a quote from you here saying that you plan to use your knowledge of global logistics to foster more vital collaboration between players in the fresh produce supply chain, including service providers and carriers. Talk to me a little bit more about what you meant by that and what the ambition is there.
Well, we have a lot of ambition, and we can take 3 years at least to reach certain milestones. But I think the key word here is interoperability. Today, I mean, ask the question to the audience here. How many people are still pushing paper, really, from one to the other? It's amazing how much paper we still handle for a shipment. Now, can you imagine that all of that is digitized, but that nobody is working in silos anymore, but that we're really creating an ecosystem where people are more using data, in a way that it interoperates with the functions that the other have. Now, we all know that there are companies that there are even some carriers that believe that they can play a certain role in what they call vertical integration. It's a model, and it's for sure a model that will work, but I believe there is a lot more efficiency to get out of interoperability between people that are really good in a certain thing, cold store operators, transportation companies, carriers, and all of the other stakeholders that are vital, you know, in a performance supply chain. So this is the first thing we're going to focus on. We're going to bring together academic stakeholders, industry stakeholders, in order to start scoping what does it actually mean. So it's a very good question. As soon as we know what is going to be crucial in order to make sure that people can understand each other and respect each other's business, then we are really sure that everybody in that particular value chain will make an earning, a respectful earning on the investments that they did. That is, you know, in big thing the idea. We're now in the so we're working on the subsidy. How to say that? The U.S. Department of Agriculture is going to finance the project, and as soon as that is ready, we're going to bring together a lot of people. And it's also, by the way, an invitation, because this is not limited only for IFPA members. People that really want to work also on projects, you know, here can contribute in a voluntary way. Yeah.
Well, that sounds very exciting. We look forward to hearing more about that. We've just got a couple of minutes left, and I do want to offer you the chance to ask a question or make a comment to Steve. Does anybody have something they'd like to ask or say? I'll just give you a moment to think about that. And just following up on that, you talk about collaboration and working together. Do you think that there's a bit of a trust breakdown between fresh produce suppliers and shippers over the last couple of years? There was a lot of grumblings of accusations of profiteering of the big shipping companies. Has there been a bit of does the relationship need a little bit of work?
Yeah. It's one of the other key things I want to do in the supply chain committee of IFPA is rebuild those relationships, because it has almost been violent. I mean, some of the fresh produce shippers really felt seriously, let's say, damaged about you know, some of the profiteering of some of the stakeholders. But obviously, it has always been price and demand. So the first thing that we're going to do is restore the relationship to come into a situation on the second level where there's a better understanding of each other. It strikes me sometimes how little understanding there is of a certain product that people move. What is important, the container or the product in the container? Now, for Foodcareplus, obviously, it's the product in the container. I mean, this is where we believe in. But how can you render good services for a company if you don't understand their earning model and the product itself? I mean, so that's what we really want to achieve. Make sure that everybody's back on the table. And that's why I'm inviting as well carriers, logistics service providers, insurance companies, everybody on the table in order to start discussing what they believe is important for their part. And then we're going to have a bunch of very smart people all combining that in what they call an event storm. Have you ever heard of that, an event storm? Yeah, I never heard of that too. It's an American concept. It's an event storm. And they're going to bring all that data together, and there's going to come, I think, a super premium PowerPoint presentation out of that, probably using AI, that is going to say, this is what the fresh supply chain of the future is. And this is taking each stakeholder's, you know, objectives into consideration. Yeah.
Good stuff. That just about takes up time. Does anybody have a quick question or a comment for Steve? Yes, gentleman over here. Please do introduce yourself as well.
Hi, thank you. I'm the first time in Fruit Logistics, so I'm just exploring the field. And as we all know, the chain breaks on the weakest link, and I'm learning from seeing the holes that the developing world, of course, has a major role in fresh produce, obviously. So from IFPA, that I just had to Google, to be honest, I didn't know what it was. I'm wondering if you guys have any specific strategy for like technology transfer. Everything can be wonderful here, but if it's screwed up in Latin America, where I'm from, nothing's going to really change. Thank you.
I think it's a very good question. So one of the other objectives of IFPA is indeed to deliver expertise to other markets, and especially emerging markets. And it's true. I mean, the majority of some of these developing nations are going to play a critical role in supplying the fresh produce of the future. Look at EU's landscape. What is very clear is because of many different programs on the EU, there's a lot of pressure on the agricultural landscape in Europe. But we're still going to have to make sure that we have food security, that we have people to have food. We believe that, for example, Africa is going to play a pivotal role in supplying fresh produce, into Europe. Especially if you see at the water scarcity in some of the European areas already, we're really going to need, more northbound fresh produce coming, and we already see it going more and more south. Spain is quite suffering with a lot of these. If you look at citrus, for example, I mean, the models are very clear in the next coming years. 1%, 2% decline in citrus exports from Spain, which is going to be taken over by the Turkeys and the Egypt and other markets that are going to play an important role, but also are going to create more complex logistics systems, and we'll need solutions for that in place. Yeah.
Yep, indeed. Unfortunately, that's all we've got time for. Steve, it's been an absolute joy to talk to you. Absolutely fascinating. Please do show your appreciation for Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.